The sun was beginning to dip behind the golden fields when Farmer Jack Callahan guided his old mare toward the barn. The day had been long and dry, like most in that part of Nebraska, and the air carried the familiar scent of dust and sweat. Jack was a man of few words, his life defined by work, silence, and the steady rhythm of survival. But that evening, something unusual caught his attention, a faint cry carried by the wind. At first, he thought it might have been an animal, maybe a wounded coyote. But when he turned his head, he saw something lying near the fence line, a shape too still, too human. His heart kicked against his ribs as he dismounted and hurried across the dirt. Lying there in the dying sunlight was a young woman, her dress torn and blood-stained, her skin pale beneath the dust. Her eyes fluttered open as he knelt beside her. She looked at him with a mixture of fear and exhaustion. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "Please, end my pain." Jack froze. Her voice was broken, but her words cut through him sharper than any blade. He noticed the revolver half buried in the dirt beside her. She must have tried to use it, maybe she couldn't. His rough hands reached down, pushing the gun aside carefully. "Easy now," he said quietly, his voice deep but gentle. "Ain't no one dyin' on my land today." The woman's tears mixed with the dust as she tried to move, but pain racked her body. Jack saw the bruises on her arms, the dried blood on her shoulder. Someone had hurt her. Someone had left her for dead. He took off his coat and wrapped it around her trembling body. The sky darkened, the last rays of orange fading to gray. He didn't know who she was or what story she carried, but he knew one thing, he couldn't walk away. "You'll be all right," he said softly, lifting her into his arms. She was light as a child, cold as stone. The old horse snorted, uneasy, as he laid her gently across the saddle. With slow steps, Jack led the mare back toward the farmhouse, every breath of wind whispering through the wheat like a prayer. Inside the cabin, the fire was dying low. He laid her on his cot and brought a damp cloth to clean her wounds. When she stirred, she looked around in confusion. "Why?" she asked faintly, her voice fragile. Jack met her eyes. "Because no one deserves to be left alone in the dirt," he answered. Outside, night fell over the plains, silent and endless. Inside, the soft crackle of fire filled the small room. The farmer sat by her side, watching as her breathing steadied. He didn't know who she was or what she'd bring into his quiet life. All he knew was that he had chosen mercy instead of death, and somehow, it already felt like fate. By morning, the storm that had swept across the plains had left behind a soft silence. The farmhouse stood steady beneath the pale light of dawn, the scent of coffee and wood smoke rising in the cold air. Jack Callahan sat by the hearth, watching as the woman he had rescued the night before stirred beneath a thick wool blanket. She winced when she tried to sit up, her bandaged shoulder trembling. "You shouldn't have saved me," she whispered, her voice still weak. "I didn't want to live." Jack turned his head, his weathered face unreadable. "You didn't mean that," he said firmly. "You were hurt. Folks don't think straight when they've been through hell." Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't answer. She looked around the room, a simple place, filled with tools, books, and the faint warmth of home. For the first time in days, she felt safe, and it terrified her. Jack poured a cup of water and handed it to her. "Drink this," he said. "Then we'll talk about what happened." She hesitated before taking it. "My name's Sarah," she said quietly. "Sarah Whitmore." He nodded. "Jack Callahan." Her gaze drifted to the revolver lying on the table near the door. "You kept it," she said softly. "Didn't think it was right to throw it away," he replied. "But you won't be needin' it again." Sarah's eyes flickered with shame. She wrapped the blanket tighter around her and stared into the fire. "They killed my husband," she said finally, voice trembling. "Outlaws. They came for our horses. When he tried to stop them," she paused, swallowing hard. "They shot him. And they," her words broke off, her breath shuddering. Jack didn't press her. He sat quietly, letting her speak when she was ready. "I ran for 2 days," she continued. "Thought I could make it to town. But the cold." Jack leaned forward, his voice low. "You made it here. That's what matters." She looked up at him then, truly seeing him for the first time, a man hardened by life, yet kind in ways he didn't show easily. There was something in his eyes that reminded her of the man she had lost, strength, but also sorrow. Over the next few days, Sarah slowly regained her strength. Jack tended to the animals, chopped wood, and made sure she had food and rest. She began helping around the cabin, mending his shirts, sweeping the floors, finding purpose again in small tasks. One evening, as the sun sank behind the wheat fields, Sarah stepped out onto the porch. Jack was fixing a fence near the barn. When he looked up, their eyes met. For a moment, everything stood still, the wind, the world, even time itself. "You saved me," she said quietly. Jack wiped his hands on his coat. "No," he said. "You saved yourself. I just gave you a place to do it." But deep down, as he watched her smile faintly in the fading light, he realized the truth: she was saving him too. Weeks passed, and life on the Callahan farm began to settle into a quiet rhythm. The once broken woman who had begged for death was now walking through the fields with her hair loose in the wind, helping Jack feed the horses and gather eggs each morning. Her laughter, soft and shy, began to echo through the empty halls of the farmhouse, and Jack found himself waiting for it like the sunrise. Sarah had learned the land quickly. She moved with care, hands steady as she milked the cows or mended the fence beside Jack. Sometimes, she'd glance at him, noticing how he'd work in silence, the lines of his face carved deep by years of loneliness and labor. But there was kindness beneath that silence, the kind that didn't need words to be understood. At night, they'd sit by the fire. Sarah would read aloud from one of Jack's old books, stories of faraway cities and people who lived lives beyond the plains. She'd stumble over the fancy words, and he'd chuckle softly. "You read just fine," he'd say. "Better than I ever could." One evening, Sarah found an old guitar covered in dust behind the cupboard. "You play?" she asked. "Used to," Jack said, smiling faintly. "When there was someone to sing to." "Then play now," she said. His fingers were clumsy at first, but soon a soft melody filled the small cabin, a tune slow and sad, like the wind over an empty prairie. Sarah closed her eyes, humming along. For the first time in years, the old farmer's heart felt something it hadn't felt since his youth: peace. But the peace didn't last long. One gray morning, as Sarah hung laundry outside, a group of riders appeared in the distance. Dust rose behind their horses as they approached the fence line. Her blood ran cold. She recognized them, the same outlaws who had destroyed her life. Jack saw the fear on her face and stepped out of the barn, wiping his hands on his coat. "You know 'em?" he asked. She nodded, her voice trembling. "They're the ones. They think I'm dead." Jack's eyes hardened. He reached for the shotgun leaning against the wall. "Then let's keep it that way." The riders stopped at the gate, calling out, pretending to be travelers looking for water. But Jack saw the lies in their eyes. He stood tall, the wind tugging at his hat brim. "Ain't nothin' for you here," he said coldly. The leader smirked, hand on his gun. "We'll see about that, old man." In that moment, Sarah saw a side of Jack she'd never seen before, calm, fearless, unshakable. The man who had once saved her with kindness was now ready to defend her with fire. When the riders finally turned and rode away, the air felt lighter. Sarah looked at Jack, tears in her eyes. "You risked your life for me," she whispered. He shrugged, eyes soft. "You're part of this land now. And I protect what's mine." For the first time, Sarah realized she wasn't a burden anymore. She was home. The morning after the riders left, the sun rose soft and golden over the horizon. The wheat fields glowed like fire, and for the first time in a long while, the Callahan farm felt alive again. Sarah stood by the window, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee Jack had made her. The fear that had lived inside her heart for months had begun to fade, replaced by a quiet strength she didn't recognize but liked. Jack came in from the porch, wiping sweat from his brow. "They won't be back," he said simply. "Men like that don't bother what they can't scare." Sarah smiled faintly. "You weren't scared," she said. He looked out toward the fields. "Oh, I was," he admitted. "But I've lost too much already." Wasn't about to lose something again that mattered. Her heart fluttered at his words. She wanted to speak, to thank him, to tell him how much his kindness had rebuilt her, but the words felt too small. Instead, she stepped forward and laid her hand gently on his arm. "You didn't just save my life, Jack," she said softly. "You gave it back to me." That spring was the best the land had seen in years. The rains came on time, the cattle were strong, and the fields seemed to shimmer with life. Sarah worked beside Jack every day, her laughter echoing through the fields, her strength returning in ways she never thought possible. Sometimes, at sunset, they would sit together on the porch, the sky painted in reds and golds. She'd ask him about his past, the wife he had lost to fever, the years he had spent alone trying to keep the farm alive. Jack would speak slowly, his voice heavy but warm, and Sarah would listen, her eyes full of quiet understanding. One evening, as the sky darkened, Sarah turned to him. "When I first asked you to end my pain," she whispered, "you could have walked away." Jack looked at her, his weathered face softening. "Could have," he said. "But I reckon if I had, I'd still be the one lying there dying inside." Tears filled her eyes. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The wind rustled through the tall grass, and the stars began to appear one by one. Then, almost shyly, she reached for his hand. "So what now?" she asked. Jack smiled, the kind of smile that reached his eyes for the first time in years. "Now," he said, "we live." That night, the little farmhouse glowed warmly against the endless dark plains. Two broken souls, once lost to grief and loneliness, had found a way back to life, not through miracles or chance, but through simple acts of mercy and courage. And as the seasons changed, the story of the farmer and the woman who chose to live spread quietly across the valley, a reminder that sometimes, the smallest kindness can turn despair into love, and sorrow into something worth living for. The end.